Hi everyone, this video has a specific focus to it, and that is to demonstrate how to make your own alpha brush, your own, what is basically a modifier for the brush tool, the sculpting tool, with the basic sculpting tool in SculptGL. Now, if you remember previously we looked at how to use the ones that you can download from resources like the alpha library at pixellogic.com. If you forgot where to find this particular library, it's should be under week 3. Today, again, we're going to look at making our own custom brushes instead of downloading them. How we would go about actually making our own brush. So I'm going to first show you an easy way and then a more complex way, which actually uses photographs instead of more simpler geometry like these dots, for example. So if you remember previously, under week 3, I did recommend as a under the checklist for the end of the week, was an optional download, but it's called GIMP. And if I click through to there, it brings up the website for GIMP, specifically the download section. But if you look at the website itself, it is a free image manipulation program. So it's very similar to Photoshop, not quite as powerful, but considering it's free and it's open source, it's actually fairly useful. I use it all the time. And the reason I still use it in these demos and for my courses is that when I was told to create the course and create the syllabus, one of the most important criteria was that all the software that I show you has to be free. I can't assume that any of you will have access to a license for Photoshop or any other kinds of more expensive software. So you can use Photoshop to do what I'm doing today in this demo, but because the demo is using GIMP, it might be easier for you to follow along if you use this instead. It's not a big download. It's not going to take a lot of room on your computer, and it is available for both Mac and Windows. So after you've installed GIMP, this is what it looks like, the interface. I have open here one of the brushes from last week's demo using the downloaded alpha brushes from that library I was reviewing a few minutes ago. And this is what the interface looks like. Again, it's not that dissimilar from most graphics editing programs. It's just maybe not as pretty as you might be used to. So there's a few files I'll work with today, and you can find those under week 4. Go to week 4. Again, at the time of recording this video, none of this has been published or visible to you, but by the time it's published, it will be visible. If you're wondering why there's a little hidden modifier under week 4, that will not be there when you see this. So there's the blurb for the week, and you should also be getting an announcement ahead of the video being published, which will explain that the video will be published ahead of class time because the whole idea is that it'll be a blended synchronous and asynchronous video. So part of the first half of the course, the class rather, you should be looking at the video if you haven't already, absorbing that information if you choose to absorb it. And then the last half of the class will actually look at your ideations. There'll be some one-on-one consultations. We'll still use the virtual classroom setup for that, but it will be the focus of the last half of the class. That way, you know, I don't have to repeat myself too much in the video, and you guys can look at that information when you need it. If you decide that you don't want to make your own alphas, that's okay. It's not a requirement for any of the projects that we do in the class. This is just some value added content. It's showing you how to further streamline or tailor the sculpting experience to what you want to achieve. And then down here, at least at the time of creating the video, there's a link to a texture library, which is this website right here. And as you can see, there's quite a few. Each one of these square images goes to a larger category of different free images that you can download and use to make your own brushes from. And we'll get into that as we go along with the demo. And the other link is a download, a zip download. It's all the files that I'll use, or at least most of the files I'll use in the demo today. So without further ado, I'll go back to Photoshop. And the idea here, not Photoshop, GIMP. Let's see, I'm tricking myself. We're going to make our own alpha brush. And if you remember this example that I've opened, the big, the sort of distinguishing feature of these brushes is that they are black and white, or more specifically, they're grayscale images. They have no color information, and the difference between the black and the light, the brightest and the darkest pixels, those differences dictate to a sculpting program like SculptGL how it's going to behave, what it's going to do to that model. Anything that's white is going to be raised, or if you invert the brush, lowered. And anything that's black is essentially null or zero. It does not rise above the zero plane. It doesn't add any material or any height to the model. So that's kind of the logic we have to think within. And if we want to make a really simple brush just to get a handle on the process, and before getting too too hung up on the details, all we need to do is think about making a basic image like this. So I'm going to make a new image. And again, you don't need to know GIMP very well at all to do this, because most of the functions are fairly similar, and you can really just do what I'm doing here, and that's all you really need to know. So if I go to File, New, I already have an image open here, so it's going to default to the size of the image. What I really want to do is make a square, and this is not actually a perfect square. So really, a good resolution is sort of what you can get away with, but I found that 1048 by 1048 pixels is a pretty good medium between, low res and not too high res, that it gets everything kind of complicated. So that's good. And then under advanced options, I don't really care about the X and Y resolution because I'm not printing the image. So 72 is fine. I want the color space to be grayscale. So that's important. And I want to fill it with what is essentially complete black. So before I should have showed that before, but on the little swatches here, my background color should be RGB 000 across the board. That way I know that it is completely, it's pure black. There's no color information in there at all. So I'm going to fill it because I've this little you can see there's a white and a black rectangle on my tray and on the top left here, and there's a way to flip between them by just clicking them. Basically, whatever's in front is your foreground color, and whatever's in the back is your background color. And as long as the black is in the background, I can tell when I make my new image to fill it with the background color. So here's my new image. It's just a black square, nothing exciting about that at all. And if I look at my foreground color, it's actually kind of a grayish color, but if I make it a little bit closer to white, I guess that is as close to white as it gets in grayscale. I can essentially just draw on my black background and create brush. Because as long as I'm giving it that value difference between white and black, I've got an alpha brush. It's that simple. Even though I haven't actually added any alpha, if you know anything about image editing, an alpha channel is that transparency channel, and this has no transparent information in it whatsoever, and yet it will still work. As long as my background is that pure 000 RGB, and as long as I'm at grayscale, it should be fine. So the simplest option would be to use something like the just the airbrush or paintbrush in this case tool. I think there might be an airbrush tool. Yeah, airbrush. But if I go to the paintbrush tool, I can modify the brush as long as it has a nice feathered edge. It has a nice soft edge to it. It's not a hard edge brush. I'll get that nice transition that I see in most of these alphas that I've been downloading and playing with. And my brush is way too big right now. That's because I was playing with it before. And the absolute simplest thing that I can do is just doodle on this black background. So if I just make a bunch of squiggles and dots, I'm not thinking about it at all. That could be a brush. It might not be a very exciting brush, but we can see what we get. So after I'm done, I guess I'm done. I haven't done much, but this would work. I can, and again, because I'm using a brush that is nice and is soft, it's not a hard edge, versus one of these larger black circles over here, that would be a much different effect. It would be a lot more graphical, like that stencil brush I showed you last week. So because this is nice and soft, I really don't need to do anything more for this to work except for exporting it. If I save it, it will save it in GIMP's native format, and that's not going to work for SculptGL. It has to be either a JPEG or a PNG, and I prefer a PNG whenever I can. So I need to go to Export As, and I'll call this, make sure you save it in a location you can find it. And I'll call this week 4 brush 1, just to give it something I can recognize. And I want to save the background color, and that we'll see if that matters. Actually, we'll see. But and I want to make sure my compression level is 0, because this is not. I don't want to potentially compromise the quality of the image by compressing it. So I always put that. It might be set something. Usually it's 6 as a default. I'm going to set it to 0. Okay. So now that we have the file and hopefully we know where we saved it, if we go over to SculptGL, this is a new instance of SculptGL. I haven't done anything to it. It's still just the plane sphere from when we started, when you usually start a model. And I'm under my sculpt tools, I'm set to the brush tool. That's important. Your alphas will not work with most of your other brushes, with one exception, which I'll get to. I can then go under alpha. Right now, here it says none. If I go to import alpha, I can go to the file, the wherever I saved it. So here's the file. I was playing with some other files there earlier. So there's a file I made, week 4 brush 1.png. I've imported it. So now under texture, there it is listed. So again, remember, there's 2 ways of using an alpha. You can either use it as is, in which case I can paint along the surface and it just follows the brush, which may be what you want. And it's not a bad effect for such a simple brush. Or if I use the lock position, little check right there under the right above where the texture selection is, That way I can be a lot more controlled about it. I can rotate, I can zoom, as I'm dragging my mouse away from the sphere, I can make it as large or as small as I want. And that is actually not a bad brush, considering it took me all of 30 seconds to make. And you can play with this. You can see what kind of effects you get just by drawing a soft, kind of like an airbrush style brush line over a black background. Again, as long as it's grayscale, set to grayscale the color space of the image. And that black in the background is a true RGB 000 black. And that you don't go, and the other thing I should mention is that I'm not going all the way to the edge of the image. I need to make sure I maintain a black border. Otherwise, you won't be able to tile it, you know, the way it was going over the edges as I was sort of painting it on. And it also means that if you go past that square, if I do this, for example, that's not going to look very good when you actually draw with it. And I'll show you what it looks like when you don't have a true black for your background. If I go back to my original, the same SculptGL instance I was using before, if I import an image that I was playing with before that I know I didn't make correctly, and again, this won't be in the zip file, but this one looks good. But as soon as I start drawing on it, you can see that it's drawing with it rather. You can see what happens. I get this ghost of an outline, this border, this square border. It looks subtle now, but it can actually start to, you know, it can mess you up, especially if you don't want that effect. You can sort of see it there where it's overlapped with the previous instance of the brush I used. And if you see that outline, it means you don't have that proper black for your background. And if you need help with this, if you're like struggling and no matter what you do, you get this background, I can make you a template. It's just going to be a plain black square with the correct color information in it. And that way you can use that to make your own brushes. That's if you get stuck and you really do want to get rid of that square. Just again, just email me if you need that kind of hint or that little bit of a boost. So that's the most basic brush you can make. And I will also, before I go forward with this, I'm going to undo all these strokes. This is also the way you would make a text brush or a stamp, something that if you wanted to add your name to a piece, maybe you wanted to, you know, add a signature, you could do it this way as well. And again, this is a basic program, so I can't necessarily vouch for how well it's going to work for you. So this is not a very big, these letters, I use the text function, which looks like an A on the tray over there. And I'll just undo what I just did just to show you what I did. So I selected the text function, then you have to drag a box out where you want to type the text. And right now the text, you can change the font. Sans serif is fine for this test. It's not very big, so I kind of have to adjust the pixel size until it gets to a size I can use like that. So let's try just call this let's just call it DC for Durham College. Now this is going to be a very crisp line, so I don't know what that's going to look like, but it might be fine. I can make it bold just to give it a little bit more body. You don't need to, obviously, but it always helps. The more structure something has with a 3D printed object, the better. And, you know, I can make it a little bit bigger. This is the awkward phase because it's always going to be dependent on the settings that you're already under, and I never make text that's 500 pixels wide, but for the sake of this particular demo, it's going to work. And once I'm done with the text, if I hit enter, that kind of commits for it, or just click outside the area, and I go to the move tool. That way I can actually move the text around. And let's try exporting this. And again, if you export it, what it does is it flattens the image to not have two layers, and it also changes the format. So if you just save the file, you're saving in GIMP's proprietary XCF format, which nothing except GIMP will be able to read. But it's just a matter of saving as, so I'll just call this week 4 brush 2. All right, save the background color, yep. Export, no compression. Now let's try to import this guy. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna undo some of the brushwork I've done just so I have some room. I'll import our new brush. I'm going to use the lock position right out of the bat because I want it to I want to be able to place it and scale it. And there we go. I've got two big letters. Now, obviously, because they're so big and my mesh is only so high res, it's going to get some distortion, but I could always add resolution or use dynamic topology to smooth that out or smooth it out after the fact. And this is where, again, you can start thinking about how to use these stencils to create more, these brushes like stencils, or like almost like you're making a cookie cutter, but instead of cutting away material, or adding with it. So again, those are some basic brush techniques. Just this plain black background with some kind of white detail. Now, sometimes you want to be a little bit more fancy. You want to actually use something from a photograph to make your texture. You want something from real life. And that is an important skill to have, I would say. And in that zip file route with all the demo files, you'll see some images. There's a very large, very high res image of this tokay gecko, or Madagascar gecko, day gecko. There it is. In the name of the file. There's a zoomed in version of the gecko skin where it's just the skin. There's some tree bark. There's some rock texture. Some cracked mud from a riverbed. Well, that's not in the file, but. So these are just there for you to play with. Obviously, some of these I got from that texture library, and some of them I found elsewhere, but they're all free, so you can do whatever you like with them. But just to sort of give you an example, if you're making a creature that you wanted to emulate, you wanted to get that kind of pebbly skin detail that this creature has, you could get a good high-res image of it and then just select what part of it interests you and take it from there. So again, this other version of making a brush is going to be a little bit more complex, but it's worth knowing about because it can really expand the abilities or the ways that you can express your concept in 3D. So I'm going to I'm going to go back to GIMP. I'm going to open up that gecko image, the one with the whole body. And the idea here is that I'm going to select, if it even lets me do that. Okay, so it wants to convert it from a different color space, because a color palette. That's fine. Just let it do that. So it's a very high res image to the point where I can zoom in right into the body if I want to. So if I go to my zoom tool, if I select a different area to zoom into, as you can see, this is actually a very high res image. And what I could do from here is just selectively use just a part of the skin that has a lot of interest in it, like maybe this part right here, right on the shoulder. So the first thing to do would just be to crop the part of the image that interests me. And I don't necessarily care how big it's going to be as long as it has all the information I want. So if I hold down the Shift key so what I'm doing right now, I'm using the Select tool. If you're not familiar with that, the rectangle select. And if I'm dragging out that select, it's kind of hard to see on this bright green background, but if I hold down the Shift key, it will confine it to a square. So once I have the area that I'm interested in selected, I can then crop the image. So crop to selection, image menu, crop to selection, and that leaves me with just this one area from that huge image, very high-res image. I just have that one little patch of skin. So I can then go to select none. And then the other thing I need to do, remember that in the other versions of these alphas we were looking at, they are all black and white, they're grayscale. So I should convert the color mode to grayscale from RGB. So I go to image mode. Right now it's at RGB. I want to go to grayscale. So that just takes out all the colors and replaces it with those light and dark values this is what we want. We don't really want color when we're making an alpha. And then the other thing I can do is I can play around with the values of the image because I want there to be a little bit more contrast. Maybe contrast is enough. So if I go to brightness, so under colors, brightness, contrast, I want it to be the whites to be a little bit brighter and the blacks to be a bit blacker, so I can play with that. I don't want it to be completely flat like that because that will get rid of the that beautiful 3D effect. So I just want to play with it a little bit. Contrast will help me get deeper blacks in between the scales, but will also destroy some of that nice gradient on those scales. So it's a happy balance. I can't go too far. That looks okay for now. So let's see what that does. The other aspect you can play with is the levels, and levels meaning the bright, the black and the white values. This may or may not help me at this point actually, but you can see that by adjusting the input levels here, I can get a much sharper result. See how it kind of like where I was fiddling with the brightness, wherever it got sort of overexposed, it's now kind of walked that back a bit, and also given me more definition between the scales. So that looks good. Now the issue here is that this image goes all the way to the edge, right? There's no black border, and in order to figure out where we can't just, cut out a circle. It won't look very good. What we need is that nice feathered edge to it. You can kind of think about what I'm going to do as kind of like applying a circular vignette filter to an image. So something like this, where it's a photographic technique where you want to focus on what's in the center of the frame and give this sort of a soft border around the perimeter of the image. You could also kind of think about it like you're peeping through a keyhole. So everything kind of gets, blurred out at the edges and darkened at the edges. It sort of fades to black around the region of interest, which is the scales, the center of the image. So in order to do that, I have to add another layer to this image, and then create what's essentially going to be a radial gradient. It will make sense once you see me do this. But I'm I'm going to, in my layers menu, which should be default be visible, which is usually it should be at the bottom right of the screen. If it's not, you can probably open the layers dialog box from one of these menus here. So I'm going to add a new layer, and to do that, on my layer tray at the very bottom here, there's a create a new layer button. It's not very big. And I want to add a layer filled with transparency. Down here, your options, foreground, background, white. I want transparency because that's going to add the alpha channel that we need to create that transparent little peephole in the center of the image. I'll say OK. And for now, I can actually hide. So the little eyeballs in the layer menu, the layer dialog here, I can hide the original image that I just made with the scales. And that way I only see this new transparent layer. And because it's transparent, I see this checkerboard effect that lets you know that there's no color information. It's completely transparent. So what I'm going to do is use a gradient. So the gradient tool is also in my top left toolbar tray here. It just looks like a gradient. And what I'm looking for is to make a I guess opacity, we can try to set it to 100 is fine. And if I go to the gradient selection here, which lets you scroll down between different kinds of gradients, I want foreground to transparent. That's the one I want selected. Now the trick is right now my foreground color is white, and it should be the black. So I'm going to reverse it just by clicking. Oops, clicking on the black. It should, or that little forwards backwards arrow. It should flip them so the black is now your foreground color. Now you can see that it goes from black on the left to transparent on the right. And I want it to be a radial gradient. So under shape, default is usually linear. There's all these other ones, but the one I want is radial. And the other thing I need to do is make sure I'm starting from the center of the image. I'll show you what happens when I add a gradient. That's your gradient. So I just clicked in the image and pulled back. And the further I pulled back, the more of a gradient it affected. I'm going to undo that, because I just wanted to show you what happens. But I want to make sure that I'm starting from the center of my image. And since it's hard to eyeball it, especially when there's actually no other visual cues except for maybe this ruler, which again may be enough for you, I'm going to add some guides. So if I go to image, guides, new guide by percent. And again, I'm not expecting you to have known this existed, but if you just go to that menu and just follow what I did, it should be pretty straightforward. And I want to add a position at 50%, which is, again, 50% from the side of the image, which should be the center. It'll be vertical this time, which is fine. I'll say OK. And that adds a blue line through the center, this dotted line. That's just a guide. It's not in the image. It's just there to guide our movement. And then I'll go back again, image, guides, new guide by percent. And this time, instead of vertical, I'll go horizontal, also at 50%. And then where those converge, I know that's the center of my image. So now, still with the gradient tool active, I'm going to, and again, I've hidden the scale image. I'm on that new transparent layer as my active layer. I'm going to line up my mouse crosshairs with the guides that I just made. And I'm going to click in the center and start pulling down. I don't want to go too far, right? Because otherwise I completely negate the whole purpose of doing this. I want to make sure I don't go any further than about there. And once I'm happy, I can just release. And then if I'm happy with that, if I hit enter, yeah, go outside of the tool. And there's that little keyhole, that little peephole effect. And if I turn the original layer back on that had the scales on it, you can see what it's done. It's hidden the other parts of the image except for that center area, and that makes sure that we have a nice feathered edge. It could be a little bit more feathered, to be honest. In fact, you know, what I could do is just blur it. I've never done this before in a demo, so I'm not going to say what I'm doing until I know it's going to work. I don't think that really did anything, actually. No, I think we're okay. So forget about that. But that's what it looks like. And again, it could be a little bit more feathered on the edge, but considering what we had before, it's not too bad. And if you think that there's not enough lightness coming in from the center, you can also use the eraser tool. Looks like a little eraser. And this works very similar to what we just did with the gradient, except it just takes, instead of adding a halo around it, it's just going to, that's way too big. It's just going to take information away. It's just tricky to get the right size, that's all. But if I start it right in the center, you can see how just a few clicks, and it is snapping to that grid as well, which is helpful. Oh, see, I did something wrong there. There we go. Must have been when I did that blur tool. Which you should not do, because I was not impressed with it. I can try to add a little bit more brightness. There we go, like that. So let's see how that works. I may have made the vignette a little bit too big, but maybe not. So I'll save that as, or export that as rather, a PNG, and I'll call this week 4 brush 3. Again, you don't have to follow my naming conventions. It's just for the demo. And again, I want to save the background color, and I don't want any compression. I'm saving it as a PNG. If I go back to my my sphere, I can import what I just made. There it is right there. It actually looks a lot better once I've exported it. Oh, so that's right on the symmetry line, so that's why it's doubling. If we do it down here instead, that's actually a very nice brush. And again, it didn't take too much effort, not a lot of time, as long as I approached it and I knew what I was doing. But adjusting the brightness and contrast, adjusting the levels, gave it a little bit more punch, I think. You can also play with what it looks like without doing that versus adjusting the levels and the contrast. So that's not bad at all. So those are the two methods. Now, I will say before I end this video, because I don't want to be too long of a video, I want it to be easily digestible. I could go through the other images, but you kind of get the idea. So you could, again, take something like this cracked mud riverbed, select part of the image. You don't want the whole thing. You want to do some editing, right? You want to figure out what the most important part of the image is, and like this little white thing up here is probably not going to be helpful. So, you know, crop out what you don't need and preserve what is most interesting, and then play with the levels, adjust the colors, obviously the grayscale, and see what you get. But I will say, important, after you've gone through the trouble, and actually I can show you the saved version of the PNG version looks a lot better than it did inside GIMP. See, it looks a little harsh here, but once it's been exported as a PNG, it looks a lot more, a lot softer on the edge. Anyway, once you've made the transparent layer with that keyhole, see if I take out the Madagascar, the gecko skin, that's on another layer in the image. You can actually add whatever image you want into this image now. So you could actually just save this as a working version of a brush. So if I save, I'll just save. If you save and not save as, excuse me, again, it saves, or if you don't export it, it saves as an XCF. Again, that is Photoshop's native format, or sorry, GIMP's native format. It's like a PSD file, a Photoshop file. If I save that now, I can call this week 4 brush template. And now I can take an image from another source, and I can show you very quickly what I mean by that. If I open up one of those other images, let's say the soil I was talking about before. I'll do this very quickly, just like the gecko skin. Again, I'll take my rectangle select at the top left there on the toolbar or tool tray, and I'll click on an image where it looks kind of interesting. So maybe over here. I'll hold down Shift to make sure it's square while I'm doing it. Maybe it's more interesting. I don't know. Maybe it's actually more interesting over here. So you can always change your mind. There's no harm in that. So like right there, and then I can crop image, crop to selection. I can change the colors again. I can go to mode, image mode, grayscale. I'll play with the levels. So I don't even need to bother with the brightness and contrast. Just playing with the light and the dark levels, I can get something that has quite a bit more contrast and a lot more body to it. So there we go. And if I now copy this, so edit, copy visible. If I go to that back to the template, so if I have multiple images open, they show up here on this bar. If I go back to the template image I was made, and again, this still has the skin, but it's below the layer that the keyhole is in. So if I turn it off, it just disappears. I can paste in this thing that I just copied into this new image. So if I go to edit, paste as new layer, so it's now at the top of the image, and it's also completely zoomed in. So maybe that wasn't the best idea. So I'm going to undo that. Actually, you know what? Let's see if I can scale. No. It did zoom it in. So because the images were a different scale, it kind of zoomed it right in. But that's still kind of interesting. If I didn't want to do that, if I wanted more of the image, I could instead make a new layer. If it's transparent, it's transparent. That's okay. And then I'll just paste into selection because the layer is selected. Let's see what happens. Oh, it's still zooming it in. Let's see, paste as. So I think I have to resize. That's my image. That's my issue. I forgot to resize it. So if I go back here, if I resize, so there's a bit of a teachable moment there. Canvas size, right now I'm at 722. So I need to scale it up to 1048. I know that's the size of my other image. Whoops. I accidentally sized the canvas instead of the image, scale image, sorry. 1048, 1048. And then it's doing a scaling operation down here. Hopefully it doesn't crash on me. It wasn't necessary that I do this, but I did want to show you that you can just take something from a different image and put it into the vignette that you created, so you don't have to recreate it every time. I'm going to pause the recording and see if I can fix this so I'm not just talking in circles. Just bear with me. All right, well, GIMP crashed, which crashed my computer, which messed up the recording, but the point here is that when it comes to bringing an image from another source into your previous image, the trick is really just to scale the image after you put it into another layer. So again, that cracked riverbed image here, I'm going to copy it. So edit, copy visible, go to my previous image. Again, the scales are still there. Now I paste it, edit, paste as new layer. There's that outline of the layer, in yellow, it shows that it's way too big. So if I go to transform, I can use this little handle here to scale it until it's closer to the size of my vignette here. And now I just need to move it into place, like so. So now that you can you can even move it around until you've got, oops, that's the wrong part of the image. You can sort of move it around until you get the part of the image that you like. And as long as it's under that layer with the little vignette, the little peephole, then you can put whatever you want underneath it. And obviously, if I hide that one, the riverbed, and bring the scales back, then it's fine. Or I can swap them in and out. I can add as many as I want and just sort of plug and play and see what I get. So let's export this one. I'll call this brush 4 for the week, just to see what we get. Will have to be on the bottom of the, well, I'm running out of room on my mesh, so I'm going to undo some of these, okay? There it is right there. And it's not a bad effect. It's from a dry riverbed, but it could work as, you know, rhino skin, elephant skin, there's a hint. Any kind of cracked pachyderm type skin would actually be fairly convincing. And that way you don't have to worry about sculpting all those little cracks. You could just do it that way. All right, so that's making your own alphas in different ways. Some a little bit more frustrating than others, a little more time consuming. Um, I will say, just as to make it more interesting and probably more enticing for you, you can use these same brushes to paint with as well. So rather than adding 2D information, you can use them like a stencil with color. And we'll get into that next week. But for now, I hope you do try this. It's not required, not at all. But if you do this for any of your assignments, if you show me that you've made your own brushes, um, as long as you're obviously sourcing the images that you used, then I consider that going a little bit more, above and beyond the bare basics of the assignment, and I will give marks accordingly. But if this looks like it's a little bit too involved for you, a little bit too, doesn't look like you're going to get anything of value out of it, then you don't have to worry so much about actually doing it. All right, so that's it for the videos for this week. And this may or may not be in 2 parts because of that computer crash issue, but we'll see if I can stitch them together. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy.